This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter visited Jerusalem and Sderot today as part of his week-long tour of the Middle East. Israeli officials rejected Carter's request to meet with jailed Tanzim leader Marwan Barghouti and continued to express disapproval of the former president's intention to meet with exiled Hamas leader Khaled Mashal in Damascus later in the week. IBA's Aaron Viner reports on the controversial visit.
Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter traveled to Qassam-stricken Sderot today, where he may have garnered a measure of local goodwill for his comments condemning Palestinian rocket fire, which he dubbed as, quote, an intolerable crime against innocent civilians.
They all wanted to have an end to the rockets and to have a ceasefire. But there were different opinions about how this could be done.
But it is Carter's slated visit to Damascus to meet with Hamas leader Khaled Mashal that is overshadowing his visit to Israel. While President Shimon Peres last night praised Carter for negotiating Israel's 1979 peace treaty with Egypt, he condemned the former U.S. president for planning to meet with the political head of the group branded by both Jerusalem and Washington as terrorist. Peres also took issue with the anti-Israel stance Carter has adopted in recent years. Despite stiff criticism and refusal of Israel's top political leadership to meet with him, Carter defended the Mashal meeting.
It's very important that at least someone meet with the Hamas leaders to express their views, to ascertain what flexibility they have, to try to induce them to stop all attacks against innocent civilians in Israel, and to cooperate with the Fatah as a group that unites the Palestinians.
In addition to Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu also declined to meet with Carter. The former president did hold talks this morning with Meretz MK Yossi Beilin, to whom he reportedly expressed belief that a deal for the release of captured IDF soldier Gilad Shalit is possible. Parents of the kidnapped IDF corporal were eager to meet with the former U.S. president, and Noam Shalit said, quote, the fact that Carter is not considered pro-Israel could make it easier to negotiate his son's release after nearly 2 years in Hamas captivity. This is Aaron Viner for IBA News.
And now to the visit of Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni in Qatar. While Lebanese and Iranian officials responded to Livni's presence at the 8th Annual Doha Forum by canceling their participation, there are also signs of a thaw in relations with some other Arab countries. Livni met in the Qatari capital today with the Foreign Minister of Oman, Yusuf al-Alawi bin Abdullah. It was the first public meeting between the two since Oman severed ties with Israel during the Second Intifada over 7 years ago. Livni also held talks today with the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani, and the Prime Minister of Turkey, Recep Erdogan.
Palestinian sources say that yesterday's surprise private talks between Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and PA President Mahmoud Abbas were aimed at winning Olmert's support for an Egyptian-brokered ceasefire in Gaza. Officials in the Prime Minister's office would say only that the meeting, the second in less than a week, was meant to increase the level of cooperation and coordination before Abbas visits Washington next week. The London-based Al Hayat newspaper reports today that Egypt has drafted a plan for a 6 to 12-month truce in Gaza. The paper says that Hamas has agreed to the deal, while the rest of the terrorist factions in Gaza have rejected it. More now on the controversial visit of former U.S. President Jimmy Carter to the region. We're joined in the studio by Dan Diker with the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Dan, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Is the Carter visit going to help or hurt the peace process?
Well, Laura, I think it's fair to say that the stinging criticism, even unprecedented criticism that President Shimon Peres has laid on President Carter on the very issue of the peace process process underscores the fact that that Carter's visit does retard the process from a number of different points of view. Number one, neither Israel nor the Palestinian Authority nor the United States had invited him. In fact, all three had asked him not to intervene. It clearly weakens Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, because strengthening Hamas by going to speak to an Iranian agent in Khalid Mashal in Syria, all that does is to weaken the forces in the Palestinian Authority that are amenable to a peace agreement with Israel.
President Shimon Peres did meet with Carter last night. However, the official government did not meet with Jimmy Carter. Was this a snub?
Well, it certainly was a snub. In fact, I don't think we remember in recent history such a snub of a former U.S. president. But the issue, I think, that has to be considered with Carter's uninvited visit is that he has really engaged in profound delegitimization of Israel. And I think that that's really what puts him beyond the pale. I think that's why he has been turned away by Israeli officials. His book, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, has essentially made has more than hinted at Israel as an apartheid acting state.
Its own people testified that Israel uses systematic torture. The Public Committee Against Torture in Israel accused the Internal Security Agency, Shin, of using psychological torture with Palestinian detainees and making them confess by insinuating that their families will be hurt otherwise. The report examined 6 cases, but the Shin said that they were mistakes. According to peace activists, torture was and continues to be used on thousands of Palestinians. Mohammed al-Sayed reports from Ramallah.
Torture has become a system used by Israel Shabak intelligence and internal security agencies against Palestinian detainees inside the occupation prisons to draw confessions. The Public Committee Against Torture in Israel revealed that the 2 agencies breached local and international laws. They used the families of prisoners as a way to pressure them into confessing.
They even try to use rude practices with the families and mothers of the detainees. This adds pressure on the prisoners and certainly affects them. But they keep their spirits up inside the prisons, and our spirits are raised by theirs.
There are 11,000 prisoners in the occupation's prisons. Most of them were interrogated using psychological and physical pressure. They were made to believe that their wives or sisters would be harmed, tortured, or arrested if they did not confess. Oftentimes they were made to give false confessions. A detainee committed suicide under such a condition.
In the early days of the occupation, some women were raped. Many prisoners were threatened during a questioning that their mothers would be raped to force a confession. The new development right now is that the Shabak has confessed to this ongoing crime during interrogations. We also have to mention that dozens of prisoners have been martyred during the questioning process due to torture.
The Shin admitted to the breaches in the 6 cases listed in the report by the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel. But the report says that torture and fear tactics are still used, especially by insinuating that relatives will be hurt. Palestinian prisoners' right to be protected by the law is only a formality in Israel's claimed democracy. Under the pretext of Israeli security, the law is completely overlooked when it comes to Palestinian prisoners. And if the Palestinian media fails to get the point across, then this recent testimony that comes from the home of the torturer might.
The release of the new report on the torture inside Israeli prisons coincided with a surprise meeting that was held yesterday between the Palestinian president and the Israeli prime minister. The meeting, which is the second of its kind in less than a week, comes 2 weeks before a scheduled visit by Abu Mazen to Washington, and also comes ahead of a new summit set to take place in the resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh. Meanwhile, U.S. President George W. Bush, who is expected to take part at the upcoming summit, urged both the Palestinians and the Israelis to agree on a declaration of principles that will help him meet his obligations in the region regarding the peace process. The The city of Samara is considered to be one of the hotspot areas in Iraq due to the large number of bloody incidents witnessed there. Today, the city is undergoing a strict military plan implemented by the special security forces there. The plan aims to end the violence and arms showdown in the city.
After several calls to the Iraqi authority, Al-Arabiya channel was allowed entry into Samara, which nearly dragged the country into a civil war following the bombing attack on the two Imams' shrines 2 years ago. Today, the city is undergoing military plans implemented by the security forces there. The plan aims to end the bloodshed and arms showdown.
During the earlier stage, the city of Samara had its share of armed confrontation. We work hard to improve the security situation in the city. The city is now secure. We have deployed security officers, including food and patrol units, in the city. Nearly 90% of the city is now secure.
Even the dead were not spared from the wave of violence that has targeted the city. This news comes after several mortar shells and rockets were launched on a local cemetery. Despite the noticeable calm witnessed in the city, the residents of Samara expressed concern over security in their area. Many residents also expressed sympathy for the police and security forces deployed in the area.
The security situation is now better than before. Many streets have reopened and they are now under the control of the Iraqi forces. In addition, the army is working well with the residents.
Most of the streets are still closed. On this main street in the heart of the city, which is also known as the Bank Street, most stores and businesses have been abandoned and closed.
Samara is still suffering from lack of services and a damaged infrastructure. In addition, the city is further burdened by the many narrow concrete barriers staged on its streets. Meanwhile, the security forces and supporting councils of Samara are diligently trying to restore peace and hope in the city. Amidst the heavy presence of police and army personnel in Samara, the residents are hoping that peace and security will return to the religious and ancient city of Samara. From the Imam Ali al-Hadi Memorial Shrine in Samara, Abd Qadir Saadi, Al-Arabiya.
After a week of intensified battles, how does Basra look and how does Sadr City look? The fighting between the Iraqi forces and the Mahdi army militia, in which the US spearheaded and was a major player, only served to increase the hostility and the division between the two sides. This was indicated in a statement by the Shiite leader Muqtada Sadr in response to the statement made by the US Defense Secretary Robert Gates. Sadr said that animosity towards Americans is fundamental and deeply rooted among the Sadr followers and the Mahdi militia.
This is Sadr City on a new day of bloodshed, fire and blockade. The fighting has subsided between the Shiite Mahdi militia and the US-supported Iraqi forces. There is no evidence, however, that the clashes have ended or that the rivals have grown weary. The Iraqi forces are still blocking the exits out of the neighborhoods, and US helicopters are still flying overhead. Meanwhile, it does not look like the Shiite leader Muqtada Sadr is ready to command his men to stop fighting. All signs point to the likelihood of another round of clashes, and the current calm is no more than breathing space after a fight where no one was achieving the victory they had wanted. The joint US and Iraqi forces attack launched against his militia made Muqtada Sadr more insistent on continuing what he describes as a resistance to the US occupation forces. This is in spite of the attempt made by the US Defense Secretary Robert Gates to win him over. In his latest statements, Gates indicated that Washington will not treat al-Sadr as an enemy as long as he serves a peaceful role in Iraqi politics. Sadr responded in a statement issued by his office in the city of Najaf that it is impossible but to treat the Americans as enemy. They will remain as enemies until the end of his life, and he will resist them in every possible way until they withdraw from Iraq or set a withdrawal plan. Sadr's vengeance is not limited to the Americans. His statement pours molten hatred upon those who befriended the Americans in Iraq and those who enter into treaties or negotiate with them. This could only be directed at the Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki, who personally directed a vicious security campaign against the Mahdi army in the city of Basra late last month. The campaign was called Charge of the Knights and quickly expanded to include Baghdad, Al-Nasiriyah, Karbala, Wasita, and Imara. Maliki's government says it will not stop Operation Charge of the Knights and will do what it can to chase the Mahdi army militia and to disarm them. On Sunday, Iraqi Defense Minister Abdul Qadir al-Abaidi found a large number of Iranian-made heavy artillery in Basra. This suggests that the blazing battle between the Mahdi militia and the joint Iraqi-US forces is a front to another hidden game, whose entangled threads are revealed by contradictions. Iran militarily supports Muqtada al-Sadr and his militia, which represent a front of Shiite rejection to the occupation. Simultaneously, Iran approves al-Maliki's government and the US forces to strike at these militias. This contradiction is likely explained on the premise that extending the stay of the US forces in Iraq is impossible without coordination with Tehran behind the scenes. Thus, the title is Iran has influence and the US has eternal control over oil resources until they run out.
With extreme sadness, Iraqis held a funeral procession for the martyred father Yusuf Adel in a moving ceremony. Dozens of Iraqi citizens participated in the funeral procession, which was held under strict security measures by the security forces. Pope Benedict XVI expressed his deep concern due to the assassination of Father Adel and its negative consequences.
The terrorists who assassinated the martyr Yusuf Adel have many goals, but their primary goal is to undermine the national unity and coexistence in the diverse Iraqi society. Dozens of citizens participated in the funeral procession of the martyr father Yusuf Adel, who was in charge of the Orthodox Assyrian Church of Patriarch Petros Boulos. Father Adel was assassinated on Saturday on Al-Sinaa Street in Al-Qarada. The security forces took tight security measures during the funeral procession.
He helped the poor and the needy. In a few words, he was a real priest.
Condemnation for the assassination of Father Adel continued, the latest of which came from Pope Benedict XVI, who sent his condolences to the Assyrian community, expressing his deep pain over the assassination of Father Adel. The Pope called on all people to seek peace so a tolerant society can be established in the land of the beloved Iraq.
The British Foreign Ministry announced that 2 British soldiers were killed and 2 others were wounded in an explosion in southern Afghanistan.
In the region of Kandahar, a security source confirmed that 11 policemen were killed in an attack by armed assailants, who said they were from the Taliban, according to a police website.
Many Afghan police officers were killed in a new attack by the Taliban. However, the details of the attack hint more than this. Dozens of Taliban fighters raided a police station and killed those who were inside, confiscating cars and weapons and then burning everything else. An Afghan security official said that it appears that the attackers were disguised as police officers and that the operation was perhaps carried out with the help of one of the police officers. Not far from this site, 2 British soldiers were killed and others from the NATO forces were wounded by a bomb explosion. The Taliban movement announced that it will intensify its operations this spring spring by using modern methods that it has learned throughout the past years of fighting. Days earlier, attackers believed to be from the Taliban carried out a suicide attack that targeted a NATO forces convoy. However, the attack only managed to kill 8 civilians, according to local police. In another suicide attack, a police chief who was responsible for the arrest of a Taliban leader was also killed. The escalation in attacks by the Taliban compelled NATO to pledge during its summit 2 weeks ago to strengthen its forces in Afghanistan. Amidst these developments, it appears that the spring in Afghanistan has become an annual season for the escalation of the Taliban movement's attack, especially in the southern part of the country.
With us from Kabul is our correspondent Waliullah Shaheen.
With regards to the killing of the 2 British soldiers and the wounding of 2 others, there is another version of the story by the Taliban movement, which states that these soldiers were targeted by an Afghan suicide attacker named Khalid from the Singin district in the Helmand province, and that his attack resulted in 10 British soldiers being killed and 2 others being wounded in this region. However, the statement by the NATO forces in Kabul states that 2 soldiers were killed and others were wounded. With regards to the killing of 11 police officers in the Arghandab district in the Kandahar province, the Taliban movement also has a different story about this incident.
حركة طالبان كذلك لها رواية مختلفة تجاه هذا الحدث حيث قال المتحدث باسم حركة طالبان.
A Taliban spokesman, Qari Yusuf Ahmadi, said that these clashes were not set up through communications or a relationship between the Taliban and a member of the police force. Rather, he said that this was a surprise attack on a police station in the Arghandab district by the Taliban fighters. According to the Taliban spokesman, these clashes lasted for 4 hours and 14 people were killed. In general, the situation in South Afghanistan can be described as the rebel South. This is a very accurate description because this region and these 4 southern provinces, Zabul, Kandahar, Ruzgan, and Helmand, continue to witness an average up to 20 incidents per day. However, many of these incidents are not noted, or the Afghan authorities and the foreign forces do not acknowledge them.
لا يبلغ عنها أو لا تعترف بها السلطات الأفغانية أو السلطات القوات الأجنبية.
Waliullah Shaheen, correspondent from Kabul, thank you.
Rock Petroleum has been on top of the list of fuel alternatives. It has been proposed as a way to conserve energy and rely on our local resources. The continuous rise in oil prices in the global market has become a burden on the nation's economy, hindering plans for development and improvement and the basic daily needs of the citizens. More in the following report.
The repeated discussion about extracting oil from rock petroleum has intensified with the rising petroleum prices worldwide, which reached a record high. This has made the decision to seriously consider using rock petroleum a matter that cannot be ignored.
We asked the government to take clear, realistic, and serious steps towards extracting petroleum from the rock. There is obvious economic value from extracting it, and there are no obstacles. The government has been responsive so far, and there are 4 agreements in Junay and other areas. There have been positive results, and I am optimistic that in the near future we will have alternatives to the high oil prices, God willing.
Jordan has an enormous amount of premium rock petroleum, according to specialists. If utilized, it would fulfill the country's need for hundreds of years.
The rock petroleum reserve in the kingdom is about 50 billion tons. The amount could be more based on the implementation of natural resource extraction plans. The percentage of oil in this kind of rock is at 8%. And if utilized, it will suffice Jordan for decades, or rather for centuries.
According to petroleum manufacturing experts, implementing the plan to extract rock petroleum would supply Jordan's treasury with more than $4 billion within 5 years.
The company aims to provide no less than 100,000 barrels of oil within 2 years, in addition to producing gas and electricity for Jordan.
According to estimates by specialized companies, the cost of producing 1 barrel of oil could reach $20, and it costs 4 cents to produce a kilowatt of electricity. Jordanian petroleum would be sold to Jordanians at a special price.
These locally produced supplies will be sold at a discounted price of no less than 20 to 30% of the global price.
According to experts, utilizing petroleum rock during these times is economically fruitful due to the rise of the price of petroleum globally. Jordanians have 2 dreams about extracting oil from rock petroleum: to see their petroleum come into existence and for local petroleum prices to be less than the price of oil. طايل الغرير 60 Minutes.
بعيدة عن أسعار النفط العالمية. طايل الغرير لبرنامج 60 دقيقة.
Even if you haven't been to Egypt, you've probably heard about it. Welcome to Cairo, where every hour is rush hour. Cab driver Mahmoud Abdelghani has been battling it out through the streets of the capital for 12 years. He says exhaustion has become his middle name, anger his constant state of mind.
It's crazy on the streets. It makes me physically choke. In this crowd, you basically have a nervous breakdown.
Traffic congestion is a problem in most metropolitan areas around the world. But there is traffic, and then there is Cairo traffic. 18 million people live here, making it the largest city in Africa. In the last decade alone, the government has spent nearly $8 billion on traffic infrastructure, with the goal of relieving the never-ending jams. This is the latest ring road constructed around Cairo to divert traffic from the heart of the city. But even large projects like this have failed to alleviate the chronic traffic congestion. Any real gains have been deflected, with an estimated 75,000 additional cars joining the roads every year. The crowding has meant that at times Cairo experiences average traffic speeds of less than 10 kilometers per hour. Many accuse the government of haphazard planning and failing to identify the root of the problem. At control rooms like this, traffic is closely monitored from CCTV cameras. Traffic officers say they are constantly on the lookout for breakdowns and holdups, but they say what they cannot control is people's behavior.
The number one problem we face is people's attitudes. When we try to regulate traffic in a one-way street, for example, we have to install a barrier to force people to respect the street direction. Even educated drivers keep maneuvering to dodge whatever rules there are.
Many say the government has failed in offering people alternatives. Public transport is not exactly an attractive option. Buses are overcrowded and under-maintained. Road rage tantrums of bus drivers constantly fighting through the traffic has even been blamed for exacerbating the problem. The Interior Ministry says a new law will introduce harsh penalties and strict rules. It's expected to come into effect this autumn and will feature a new numbering system for license plates after the influx of new cars meant traffic departments ran out of existing numeral variations.
The new law will act as a strict deterrent. Fines will be collected on the spot. Drivers will feel the impact of violating rules. A point system will be implemented, and it could lead to revoking licenses and prison terms.
But until these much-anticipated laws come into effect, drivers like Mahmoud will just have to deal with the daily grind. Amr al-Kahki, Al Jazeera, Cairo.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.